Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here at the Snowdon Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD, along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, and our special guest today, first, Liberal MP for Mount Royal, Anthony Housefather. Thank you for being here. And Fo Niemi, the founder and executive vice president of CRARR, which is the Center for Research Action on Race Relations here in Montreal. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
So it is unfortunately one of those weeks when there is news that we don't want to necessarily have to talk about, but we are going to talk about. We had an incident at a synagogue in Westmount. We have now, Fo, we were just chatting before we started, right, about the fact that these things seem to be happening on a more regular basis. So I guess I'll start with something that I brought up on my show, Anthony, the other day, which was after the Prime Minister announced in a synagogue in Toronto the creation of what's called an advisory council on not just anti-Semitism, although that I understand that's the focus, but on hate and race relations in general. Reaction to that, surprisingly, or maybe not, was not very good. We heard from a variety of different organizations, Jewish organizations, suggesting that, the idea of studying what's going on is not really what's needed. We know what's going on. What's needed is action. So you're not on the committee, I understand that, but you are a Liberal MP, and you've been leading the fight on anti-Semitism as well. You're co-chair of a group on online anti-Semitism. So your reaction, and whether you think this is enough?
Well, but this isn't what was announced, right? So this council is simply a council to advise Mark Miller, who's the Minister of Canadian Identity. That's not the actions the government are taking. The issue is, I can understand disappointment if people believe that the speech was about creating a committee. That's not what the speech was about. The speech was about making Canadians aware that Jewish Canadians are being targeted disproportionately more than any other group in this country right now. The only group that comes close is LGBTQ+. Because there are ideologically driven groups out there, there are politically driven groups out there, there are religiously based groups out there that are all targeting the Jewish community. And when 70% of hate crimes are against one community in terms of religiously based crimes and 19% overall, when they're only 1.2% of the population, there's a significant problem. The Prime Minister's speech was to alert Canadians that this is a national crisis. What we are doing as a government, nothing in the speech was designed to abdicate the government's responsibility. The government has put a lot on the line to adopt the Combating Hate Act, which is an act that, for example, for the Temple in Westmount, creates a standalone hate offense. So if somebody is charged with arson, you can add on the standalone hate offense, and you could have more prison time for that person that is doing the arson at a synagogue. That law deals with intimidation and obstruction when people are protesting outside Jewish community buildings. And what people are saying is, well, you're changing the law, but people aren't enforcing the existing law.
Right.
But you follow up with that.
Well, there's a question of talking the talk and walking the walk, and I don't think we're walking the walk necessarily at all.
You're right. And one of the frustrations is, right, you have municipal police that decide whether or not or how the law is interpreted. Provinces are in charge of enforcing the criminal code, not the federal government. But the federal government can rewrite the code to give police more tools. That's what the Combating Hate Act is doing. That's what the bail and sentencing bill that we're also getting through Parliament this week is doing, which means if you are a repeat offender or you commit a serious offense, it's harder for you to get bail, which is another complaint I repeatedly hear from the Jewish community when people who are targeting Jewish institutions are out on bail. So these two laws deal with fixing the law. Then what the government also said we would do, the Minister of Public Safety has said that, we will bring together the public safety ministers and we will get everybody sitting down. We will agree on training for across the country on police and prosecutors and what they need to do. We will try our best to have a common understanding amongst the provinces that these laws need to be enforced, and we need to pass on the message, whether through prosecutorial directives or other means, that the laws are meant to be enforced.
Right.
And when police and prosecutors are trained, when you have specialized hate prosecutors that deal with hate crimes, and when you have a common understanding across the country that laws need to be enforced, which is to me the follow-up of the Bail and Sentencing Act and the Combating Hate Act, then you have the action that the community is asking for, and nothing in the Prime Minister's speech detracted from that we are doing.
But yet, Fo, what is your understanding of this? I mean, it targets, by the way, not just anti-Semitism, but racism in general. And I don't know, a lot of people are not amused or thinking that it's really doing anything positive.
Well, the proliferation of, in the last, if it's a decade or so, number of hate acts, violent hate acts and hate groups in this country and online, I think certainly raises a lot of concerns. And I think we need to look at, regardless of whatever laws and policies we have, to make sure that they are implemented. forcefully and firmly, because in many times I've seen it right here in Montreal. Things are not done properly on the ground within the justice system, the criminal justice system, the human rights system. So we need to, as Anthony said, we have to make sure that things work on the ground for ordinary people. For example, I don't believe to this day the Quebec prosecution office has clear directives on how to prosecute hate crimes. So with the backlog of the criminal justice system at the municipal level, for example, a lot of prosecutors will try to get into some sort of fee bargaining or deal with the defense or drop it too quickly or to work out some community service. So those are the things that we're concerned that hate is not being prosecuted. But it's more than about prosecution. It's about prevention. Is about how to bring people together to speak out and to act together against hate, against violence, against the kind of extremism that we see more and more in different sectors of society and which we need to reach. And often we haven't been able to reach those sectors. And that's where I think things will matter.
And so that was actually the
I would just bring up, you've been doing this, CRARR's been around since the mid-'80s. You've been doing this for 40 years. Have you ever seen it? And maybe this is not fair, and if it's not, please tell me. Have you ever seen it worse than it is now?
Well, it's worse in the sense that it's we have social media that needs to be under surveillance, and there need to be curtailed because hate has been flowing freely around the world. We also have a globalization of hate. People would come here, or people from different countries, and try to get hate coming here. So, and the other thing too is that we have seen such a polarization in the last 10 years because of what's going on in the United States. So we have to find innovative and effective strategies at tackling hate and violence online from a global perspective. And we need to bring in new actors, those who have not been able to participate in preventing and in, shall we say, combating hate and violence. We need to talk about hate and violence because usually they go together. Yeah. Hate alone is not enough. We have to combat violence. And we also have to think of victims of hate crimes, anti-Semitism, as victims of crime. People need support, people need protection, and people need a strong justice system in order to make sure that their voices are heard when it comes to things such as sentencing, parole, so that their voice as victims of crimes matter.
It's one of those things where, and I hear Fo say this, and I heard what you said as well with respect to, the federal government can do whatever. Eventually, the decisions belong to municipal governments, the provincial governments. So in the case of Montreal, where we were dealing with pro-Palestinian protests going back now to at least a couple of years, and action wasn't taken, that was the previous administration. Is there any hope? And I ask you this because, you're a local MP, but Fo as well. Has there been a change in how this is going to be treated that you've seen going forward? I know she's only been mayor, at least this administration, for about 6 or 7 months. Are you seeing a change? Or are we locked in this kind of, well, we're just going to let this go until, I don't know what happens, someone does get hurt or gets killed?
So there's a couple of things. The first thing is Fo is correct. So the third piece of legislation beyond the Bail and Sentencing Act and the Combating Hate Act is the Protection of Victims Act that is also going through the House this week. There are three major different laws that we have put forward. And when those laws are adopted and have received royal assent, that is the opportunity for the federal government to convene everyone. We can't control what they do, but we can convene them and we can encourage. And the goal is here to say, we need common training across the country. We need enforcement. We need provinces on side. We need big city mayors on side. We need police on side. And that is the opportunity. Now is the opportunity to actually do that. And yes, I believe the current administration of Montreal, I believe Soraya Martinez-Ferrada is much more committed than former Mayor Plante was. You saw what she said after the synagogue. You saw what she said after the protests in Montreal. When they've hung, Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, and Trump in effigy. She said that she was going to talk to the police about their methods of, how they're handling these things. I do see a change. Last year, it's interesting in Quebec, the number of anti-Semitic incidents actually fell considerably in Quebec. It went up across the rest of the country, but it fell in Quebec. But our community doesn't notice that because when somebody is killed in Bondi, when somebody is killed in Washington, D.C., or in Colorado, or in Manchester, you see it here. It could happen anywhere because, as Fo said, this is global. Anti-Semitism and hate right now has risen throughout the entire Western world in parallel. It's not just in Canada. Canada is not an anomaly. Canada is exactly one of the many countries. When I talk to CSIS and the RCMP, And I'll ask them, is it any different in any other country that is comparable to us? They'll say no. Because you have, as he said, the internet being used. You have extremist groups like Daesh, for example, or the Islamic State, that seek to recruit people across the world to commit extremist acts. They go after young, vulnerable people, including here in Canada, but they could be in Australia, they could be in the United States, they could be in Argentina. And they become much more sophisticated in how they do that. And our intelligence services are doing, I think, an incredible job in trying to prevent these type of acts and in sharing that information with police. But we have an international danger based on how the internet works. Like, to look at the anti-Semitic acts last year that Neighbor tracked, which is a great tracker, 92% were online. And so those online aren't starting in Canada, they're starting anywhere in the world, which is why the new bill that we're going to put out on online harms is so important to keep platforms accountable. And that Mark Miller announced yesterday.
Yeah, but well and good. But for example, the incident that took place at the temple last week, the suspect, they decided not yet to try him like as a hate crime. So I don't understand why not. And now there's a story that's just come out that allegedly this guy had a walkie-talkie with him, which would seem to suggest somebody else was involved. Like, if they're not acting on doing something on this, all the talk in the world doesn't help if no one's coming down and prosecuting or doing something.
Well, I understand that the investigation taking place and there's a criminal proceeding going on. So I think we need to give it some time to get the facts straight. But in the meantime, what we've done through our organization, we brought together people from the different Asian communities, such as the Vietnamese, Cambodians, and Chinese, to come to show solidarity, to speak out, in part because the suspect is Asian. So we want to repudiate any kind of association. We also want to send the message that we need to come together and add new voices to the conversation against hate and against violence, because there are many communities out there who feel the pain, who feel the insecurity, because sometimes they live next to Jewish neighbors and institutions, but they have not been able to do so. So now we're trying to mobilize and to allow people to participate in the process of preventing and combating hate. But more importantly, one of the things that he also called to my colleagues from the different Asian communities is to increase resources to Montreal Police Hate Crimes Unit. We've got to double the number of officers and give them more capacity for prevention and community outreach. Because, in dealing with hate crime, it often depends on the ability and the capacity of people to report. A lot of people may experience some crime, but they don't know what it is, or they're afraid, or they don't have faith in the justice system. So outreach is important. And more importantly, we suggest that the city of Montreal consider creating its own municipal task force on hate in order to support the Federal Advisory Council, because I believe that Montreal needs such a coordinated municipal action plan. Because when we talk about hate, it's just not the Jewish community. We have the Muslim community, the LGBT communities. So all these communities, through a municipal structure, when you come together, I think we can develop a formidable and a very effective way of not only bringing people together, but also identifying the source of hate and combating it.
But I do think, coming back to Bill's original question, right? I agree. We can't talk about this individual incident. It's being investigated, and I don't know what the reports are, but there's obviously steps that have to be taken. The standalone hate crime in the new Combining Hate Act allows you to charge somebody with arson, then take on a standalone hate crime, which will increase the sentence.
Right.
That is important, but it's not law yet. In terms of prosecutors, my issue is, why do we not have specialized hate crimes prosecutors? Each province is able to do that. I think Ontario is moving in that direction. There is no reason that Quebec could not have properly trained hate crimes prosecutors that will take on the hate crimes. And then the other issue is, we need common directives to be given to prosecutors that government wants them to enforce the law and prosecute hate crimes, which doesn't exist right now in Quebec or in most provinces in the country. And with these new laws being adopted by Parliament, it brings that issue to the forefront. And I just want to end by saying, the Prime Minister's speech was geared to talking to Canadians, right? Fo is right. Government can pass laws and we can criminalize behavior, but we can't change public attitude easily. Most people are not going to be deterred from a hate crime that Daesh is proposing because our laws are stiffer. What we need to do is have ordinary Canadians recognize they have a responsibility when they have a colleague, when they have a friend, when they have a family member that says something that's racist or anti-Semitic or homophobic or whatever form of hate, that we need to step in, whether it's in the workplace, in the home, or in the school, in the university, and stop it and say that's wrong. And until ordinary Canadians recognize that that's their responsibility, then we're getting nowhere. And I think that was the prime message the Prime Minister was trying to deliver in that speech at Holy Blossom that I attended.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowdon Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the home of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowdon Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowdon Delicatessen. Well, I would ask, since you brought it back up, one of the criticisms, and I heard this from people when I brought this up, was the fact, to your point about wanting to make this, kind of known to all Canadians. That's why you made this speech. Why wasn't it done on the floor of the House of Commons instead of in the Toronto synagogue?
Because I personally believe that venue actually drew more attention than doing it in the House of Commons. The House of Commons, you have constant business in the House of Commons, and I don't know that the media pays that particular attention to a statement made in the House of Commons. Here, you had live coverage of this speech on literally every major network. It was on CBC, it was on CTV, it was on TVA, it was on Radio Canada. Everybody was covering this speech live. And I think it was important for the Prime Minister to go to a place that had been attacked in order to make the point. I think the point was to do it in a place that actually had an anti-Semitic incident in order to convey a message to Canadians that this is actually, as the Prime Minister stated, a national crisis that Canadians need to all work together to solve. The 1% of Canadians who are Jewish are not going to solve the crisis of anti-Semitism. You can't leave the community that is impacted, whatever community, alone to solve the problem. All Canadians have a role. And that was the point of the speech.
I would have thought if you'd done it on the floor of the House of Commons, you have all the opposition members there. That would have been a much stronger show of unity across the country from every political sphere. I sense that as a missed opportunity.
Again, I beg to differ on that one. I think that there's a lot of times that a speech in the House of Commons is important. I've made speeches on anti-Semitism in the House of Commons many times. But I do believe that got a particular amount of attention because of the venue, because it was a place that had been targeted.
Okay. The other question, I guess, is on the makeup of this advisory council.
Why weren't you on? Why weren't any of you on this committee?
Well, this isn't a committee of MPs, right?
I understand that.
Public safety committees that are the two committees of Parliament that are the most important. This is an advisory committee to a minister.
I understand.
It does not replace parliamentary committees.
But both of you are experts in this kind of field, and you would think that...
But no MPs and senators are on. So I'll leave Fo to talk about him. Yeah. But I would never have been on it because it's not a committee for MPs. It's a committee for people to advise the minister. It's ordinary citizens. And it was announced months ago as an inclusion committee. It was not announced as an anti-Semitism committee, which is why
you have one representative. Either of you, yes.
He could easily get on it for sure, but I mean, that's a different question.
It's a Prime Minister's prerogative, but I think that the committee could also benefit from the experience of a few more members. I think it's important to have a somebody from the Black community and from the law enforcement community. We happen to have a few former Black police chiefs who would certainly be great to be on that committee. We also have experts who have chaired hate crimes working groups before. I'm thinking of Karen Mopp in Toronto. Because remember, we had great clans, we have great reports. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Have people who were there like 10 or 20 years ago who know how the system works and to see how this time we can deliver. And more importantly, I believe that we need somebody on the committee who come from the justice system. I thought of recently we appointed Justice Louise Arbour as Governor General. Somebody I have always admired in my life who would be a fantastic member is Justice Rosalie Bell. I mean, Kofa, knowledge, respect, ability to reach different communities, a great communicator. And I think we have a lot of talents and we have a lot of expertise that could contribute to this committee. I see the committee as a process. Now we have to deliver as a country, as a government, as a parliament, but we have to deliver to the people on the ground to ensure not only actual conditions of safety, but also that feeling of safety. Because remember, security is psychological foremost. And as long as there are people in our cities and our neighborhoods who don't feel safe, that's not minimum. We have to do something to ensure people are safe. And hate does not differentiate. It targets some groups more effectively, but it can poison the entire city, entire neighborhood. Yeah. So I believe that the city can also do a couple of things to do its share, to contribute to this national endeavor.
In the midst of all this, Aaron wrote about it. It's been written a lot. The Projet Montréal came up with a proposal to basically suggests that the city should not have any kind of contact in terms of commercial education with Israel, and like all of a sudden it comes up, and a lot of people have spoken up against that for the reason, as Aaron pointed out and other people have pointed out, is the fact that too often people conflate Zionism with Judaism, and as soon as in their minds are unable to there are a lot of Jews who have strong opinions on Israel and are not necessarily Netanyahu fans and all the rest, but nonetheless they are all it's not a homogeneous group here of Jewish people, but yet in the minds of some who are looking to create trouble, basically, a temple. There's no the rabbi in question at the temple. There's nobody more open in terms of understanding of other communities than her, Rabbi Grushka. Who is reaches out to all the cultural communities, and yet to kind of put that temple in. It's really, really.
It's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. And just to say, yes, Lisa Grushko, Rabbi Grushko is amazing. I went to temple last week with Mark Miller and Mark Gold, and again, he had gone the night before to show our solidarity. But I agree that first of all, the municipal government has no reason to weigh in on international affairs. I was a mayor and councillor for 20 years, and I don't remember us ever having weighed in on an international issue. We certainly weighed in on domestic issues related to.
And why now, though? That's the other point.
And it's absolutely. I had retweeted what Aaron wrote, and I agree completely with what Aaron said. It is horrifying to me that when there is so much hate against Jews in this country, and the Prime Minister has just said it's a national crisis, that Project Montreal seems to think it's a good idea to demand the boycott of the only Jewish majority state in the world. It achieves nothing, right? The Israeli government is entirely different than Israeli society and Israeli people. A whole-scale boycott of Israel is insane, but more so, what's frustrating is we see, because of this political activity, this misdirection of hate on Israel that is impacting Canadian Jews continuously, where people have misunderstood, that Canadian Jews are not responsible for the actions of the state of Israel, even if we support Israel and like Israel. And it's happening over and over. It's not the same as South Africans. When Montreal took action against South Africa, there weren't South Africans in Canada that were suffering from hate. When we deal with Russians and all the activities of the government of Russia, I have not seen hate directed against Russian Canadians in the way that it's been directed against Jewish Canadians. It is obvious that this type of inaction will trigger hate in Montreal and make Jews certainly feel uncomfortable in Montreal. It is absolutely unacceptable that Project Montreal is doing this. And I'm pleased I reached out to Soraya, I reached out to a number, Alan De Sousa, Sonia Moroz, Stephanie Valenzuela, a number of members of the governing party in the city of Montreal to let them know how I feel about how damaging this is. And I certainly hope that they will manage to defeat this or get it off the agenda on Monday or Tuesday.
I don't know how you look at something like this. I didn't want to dwell on this, but to Bill's point, I mean, how you could be so, I'm not even sure of the term, so reality blind to what's actually happening on the street, and think that by adding a comment like, well, we hope this doesn't affect Jewish community. I don't understand that, and obviously
for a spark.
Well,
but
look,
beyond that,
last August 2025, we, our organization with the people from the Chinese and Black communities that support Councilor Rose, we had to push City Council at the time, which was voting on a anti-racism policy, to specifically address hate crimes, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia in the policy, because it wasn't there. So it was amended. It was voted upon 1 year almost later, where I think we should, instead of talking about some other issues, I think City Council should look at where are we with the implementation of these policies, especially in light of what happened with the temple in Westmount, to see where are we, what have we done, how are we doing, what do we still need to do in order to ensure that we have to create a safe, inclusive, and dynamic city. And right now, I think the feeling of safety is up in the air a little bit. Inclusion, is it really inclusive? I think those are the issues that we need to look at, because building a safe and inclusive city takes time, takes patience, takes commitment, and I think that's something that we should more focus on.
On the issue of safety, to your point, we had a situation a couple weeks ago, I guess this was, we had a Montreal heart surgeon, prominent heart surgeon, decide to leave, citing anti-Semitism as one of the main factors. We had another one leave. And it's gotten to the point now where some Jewish Montrealers are simply wondering, is this really a place where I see my future, my children's future, given the fact that anti-Semitism has risen to the levels that it has?
Well, I think that's there's a something that I do want to say about that, right? Anti-Semitism has risen throughout the Western world. It is absolutely unacceptable what has happened since October the 7th, and it was already rising before that, since the pandemic, because Jews again are attacked by ideological opponents, political opponents, and religious-based opponents, right? And so anybody who gets into extremism in any one of those areas is attacking Jews. But Canada is certainly no less safe than any other comparable Western country. The people that are trying to argue that, and there is a group of people out there who don't like our government, who are trying to argue that somehow Canada is less safe than the United States, where 18 Jews have been killed since Trump first became president, or Australia, where you had the Bondi incident, or the UK, where you had Manchester. I mean, Canada is no different than any other Western country. We are being beside with anti-Semitism, but to say that it's better somewhere else, that isn't true. It doesn't mean that the problem is not true and that the Jewish Canadians are not overcome with worry about the hate that we are facing. But I believe that the horizons are better if you go to Florida, where you have guns that shoot kids in schools, and where there, again, more Jews have been killed in the United States than literally, in Canada we've had 0, in the United States you've had 18. It's not true.
Okay.
And of course I think what the surgeon also, I read what Dr. Moss wrote, he got I think he said, a dream job in Atlanta. He was not unhappy with Bill 2 and what was happening in the Quebec health system. Anti-Semitism was certainly, he said, part of it, but it wasn't, I don't think, the primary driver.
Well, he's not here to defend.
I'm not, but no, but what I'm saying is we can talk about, again, we can talk about anti-Semitism, but I would note, far more Jews moved to Canada from Israel since October 2023 than in the reverse direction.
But
more Jews came from the United States than in the reverse direction.
To your point,
yeah.
Reality is reality. I completely understand that. We don't live in a vacuum here, right? The rest of the world is in this situation as well. But perception sometimes is that stronger than reality. And if you perceive the situation here to be much, much worse, you will think of moving somewhere else.
Again, I don't disagree with you. The question is where you would move that you suddenly believe is much safer. That's one thing. I don't believe there are places that are much safer. But I also would note that we are, as a community, Montreal is one of the, not only have we been here since 1760 as a Jewish community, or before even, because Jews were in New France, even though they weren't legally allowed to be there. This is an amazing community. Living in Montreal is just one of the greatest places in the world to live. And so the idea that, that you give up and you move away, I don't think is the right solution. You fight back. And I think that the vast majority of people I talk to want to fight back and want to preserve what we have. They don't want to just leave. But I understand people being afraid, because especially if you're on social media all the time, all that you're reading about in the bubble that we've created is like you're living in a different environment if you're Jewish versus people who are not Jewish, because our social media bubble, what we see in our feeds, is entirely now anti-Semitism and hate around the world.
Right.
And we have trouble, I think, understanding why other Canadians don't see it that way. But what's in their feeds is entirely different.
I'd like to point out that there's other hate, and I'd like Fo to talk about this. Like in Shawinigan, not long ago, there was a rally of keeping Quebec white supremacy. That it was very, very alarming. Politicians spoke up, but the fact that they think that they can get out there and there's an audience for them is frightening, very, very frightening, because hate exists everywhere.
As I mentioned, I think that we have to be very conscious of the growing phenomenon, and many of them could have come from the United States or from Ontario. But the point is, I think the hate is still there. It's more blatant, it's more visible, it's more present online, and we need to have an effective strategy, effective means to respond, to combat it, to contain it. And I also look at I think there's certain indicators in society. When you see polls showing that high school students are becoming more masculinist, anti-feminist, more homophobic, and those are the indicators that there's something going on there, that are classes or groups of people that are not being reached to the taught about the values of our democracy and to equality, respect for diversity and difference. We need to have something to address it intolerant in the most global and inclusive sense possible, because the more we address intolerance and it's in a sort of, or shall we say, global sense, and then we can be more effective. We can have to create a sense of solidarity, that we are each other's keepers and we have to watch each other's backs. I think in that way we can lower the temperature, but also we have to push back these growing, I would say, groups of promoting hate and white supremacy, even violence against Jews, against Muslims, against LGBTQ people. And so we need to, how would say that, have a very, very strong vision of what kind of society we want to build. Of course, we want to build a society where no one should be unsafe, should be targeted or assaulted because of who they are.
Adam and I will leave it at that. I want to thank you both, Fo Niemi, Anthony Housefather, for joining us today.
Thanks, Rand.
Thank you.
That wraps up this edition of the Corner Booth Podcast. We'll see you again soon.